And now we're going to do some problems which involve two cars. To set the problems up, you have to draw two pictures and list what information you're given and any other information you can derive from what is given in the problem. Make a list of what you know about each car, and then compare the two and look for the variable that is common to both cars. Usually it'll be that they're going the same distance or they're moving for the same amount of time. And then write an equation using the common variable. Distance of the one equals distance of the other, so that means you can cancel out one of the three variables. And if the time is the same, so the time of the first one equals the time of the second one, and you won't have to deal with the time variable. You'll just end up with equations with d and v in it. And in this problem, two cars are side by side. Car 1 is moving at 60 miles an hour, and car 2 is moving at 65 miles an hour. How far apart are they after 1 hour? Write down what we know. We know car 1 is moving 60 miles an hour. And we'll put V1, the subscript tells us that its car 1 is 60 miles an hour. And V2 is 65 miles an hour. And time. They're both on the road for 1 hour. So T1 equals 1 hour and T2 equals 1 hour. So we have our basic equation. D1 equals V1 T1, and for car 2, D2 equals V2 T2. And we're looking for distance. We don't have to manipulate this at all, so we'll D1, first car goes 60 times 1 hour. D1 equals 60 miles. And D2 equals 65 times 1. Distance for car 2 is 65 miles. The slower car, car 2, so distance apart is D2 minus D1, and that's 65 minus 60, and that equals 5 miles. Yeah, that's our answer there. Here we have two cars side by side, and they're both heading towards an off-ramp that is 30 miles away. Car 1 is moving at 60 miles an hour, and car 2 at 50 miles an hour. How far behind is car 2 when car 1 reaches the off-ramp? And how many more minutes does car 2 have to drive to reach the ramp? Okay, so we know V1, car 1, is going 60 miles an hour. And V2 is going 50 miles an hour. And V1 reaches first, so its distance is 30 miles. And we don't know the time. And we have D2 and T2. From looking what we're given, we have a D equals VT. And from what we're given, we can calculate the time it takes for car 1 to reach the off-ramp. T equals D divided by V. So that'll be 30 miles divided by 60. T will equal 1/2 hour. How far behind is car 2 when car 1 reaches the off-ramp? Car 2, D2 equals V2, T2. We know that car 1 reaches the off-ramp in 1/2 hour. So we just have to calculate how far has car 2 gone in 1/2 hour. So D2 equals 50. It's going 50 miles per hour. And in 1/2 hour, D2 will equal 25 miles. So car 2 is 25 at 25 miles, and it's 5 miles behind. How far behind is it? 5 miles. And how many more minutes does car 2 have to drive to reach the ramp? Car 2 has to cover 30 miles, just the same as car 1 did. And it's going 50 miles an hour. So if the total time it takes for car 2 to cover the 30 miles will be T2 equals D2 minus V2, and D2 will be 30 miles divided by 50. So it takes car 2 3/5 of an hour to get there. And the difference between the times is how much longer it took car 2 to get there. So we'll have T2 minus T1 equals 3/5 minus 1/2, and it'll be 6 minus 5, it'll be 1/10 of an hour. So it takes 1/10 of an hour longer for car 2 to get to the off-ramp, and the problem asks for how many minutes does it take car 2 to get there after car 1 is finished. So 1/10 of an hour is 6 minutes. Car 2 has to drive 6 more minutes to get to the off-ramp. In this problem, car 2 is 5 miles behind car 1. Car 2 is traveling at 70 miles an hour and car 1 is traveling at 50 miles an hour. How long does it take for car 2 to catch up to car 1? And what distances did each car travel? Express your answers in minutes and miles. So what do we know? Car 1 is traveling at 50 miles an hour. V1 equals 50 miles an hour. And car 2 is traveling at 70 miles an hour. How long does it take for car 2 to catch up to car 1? We'll have D1 and T1. And we'll have D2 and T2. D1 equals V1 T1, and D2 equals V2 T2. So what do we know? D1 is some distance we don't know, but we know that car 2 is 5 miles behind, so its distance will be D1 plus 5. The time we don't know, we can't calculate it, and T2 we don't know, we can't calculate it, but we know one thing, that they're on the road for the same amount of time. So T1 equals T2. So we know T1 equals T2, and we know T1 equals D1 over V, and T2 equals D2 over V2, so 1 there. So we can substitute D1 over V1 for T1, and substitute D2 over V2 for T2. And we know D2 is D1 plus 5, so we can write D1 over V1 equals D1 plus 5 over V2. Now we have just one variable that we don't know, and that is D1. We know V1 and V2. So let's solve this equation. First of all, multiply through by V1 times V2. We'll get D1 times V2 equals D1 plus 5 times V1. Expand this out. We'll get D1 times V2 equals D1 times V1 plus 5 V1. We're solving for D1, so move everything with the D1 over to the left side. That means subtracting D1 V1 from both sides, so we have minus D1 V1 plus V1 D2. This is gone, and it'll equal 5 V1. You can factor out the D1, factor out a positive D1. And that'll leave us with V2 minus V1 equals 5 V1. Isolate the D1 means dividing by V2 minus V1. We'll have D1 equals 5 V1 divided by V2 minus V1. And we know V1 and V2. V2 is 70. And D1 equals 5 times 50 divided by 70 minus 50. So D1 equals 250 divided by 20. So D1 equals 12.5 miles. And we know D2 had to go an extra 5 miles. So D2 equals 17.5 miles. What distances did each car travel? 12.5 miles and 17.5 miles. And how long did it take for car 2 to catch up to car 1? So now we know D1 equals 12.5 and calculate T1. T1 equals G1 divided by V1. T1 equals 12.5 miles divided by 50 miles an hour. So T1 comes out to be 0.25 hours, 1/4 of an hour. And that'll also be the time for T2 because they're both on the road for the same amount of time, 1/4 of an hour. And express your answer in minutes. T1 equals T2 equals 15 minutes. We have both distances, 12.5 miles and 17.5 miles, and the time it took to catch up was 15 minutes. Two cars are side by side. Car 1 is going 60 miles an hour and covers 30 miles 5 minutes sooner than car 2. How fast was car 2 going? We know car 1 is going 60 miles an hour. And it covers a distance of 30 miles. And we have a time. And car 2, we don't know how fast it's going. That's what we have to find out. And its distance is also 30 miles. It has to cover 30 miles. And its time is 5 minutes later than T1. So T2 equals T1 plus 5 minutes, which comes out to 1/12 of an hour. What we're given here, we can calculate T1. T1 will be D over V, 30 over 60, and that is 1/2 hour. So that makes T2 1/2 plus 1/12, which would be 24. 12 plus 2, 14/24 is 7/12 of an hour. We have D equals VT. And you can see the thing they have in common is the distance. They both have to travel 30 miles. So D1 equals D2, which means V1 T1 equals V2 T2. And we know everything except V2. We know V1 and T1, and we know T2. And we just plug these numbers in. 60 times 1/2 equals V2 times 7/12. So I have 30 equals V2 times 7/12. Get rid of the 7/12, multiply by 12/7 times 30 equals V2. And flip this around. I like to keep the variables on the left side. We'll have 360 divided by 7. And that would make V2 equal to 51.43 miles per hour. In this problem, we have two cars leave from the same place. Car 1 is going 50 miles an hour. Car 2 leaves 2 hours later than car 1. They are side by side 300 miles away from the starting point. Find the velocity of car 2. We have car 1, and it's given that car 1 is going 50 miles an hour. And there's no mention of time. And the distance is 300 miles. Car 2, we don't know how fast it's going. We'll have to find that out. That's what we're asked to find. There's no mention of time, but the distance is also 300 miles. We don't know the time. We have a D equals VT, but we're given V and D, and we can figure out what T is. T1 will be D divided by V1. D 300 miles divided by 50 miles an hour. So T1 equals 6 hours. And we know that T2 left 2 hours later. So that means T2 spent 2 hours less on the road. Car 2 spent 2 hours less on the road. So T2 is T1 minus 2, and it's 4 hours. And we can figure out what V2 is from that. We have D2 equals V2 T2, and V2 equals D2 divided by T2. So V2 is 300 miles divided by 4, and V2 equals 75 miles per hour. From looking at the problem, you're not given very much information. It looks like you're not given very much information at all. You hardly have anything about car 2 except the distance it goes, and no mention of any times. But as you see, you can figure out the time from the information that you've been given. You can calculate everything out, and it's not hard to find V2, which is 75 miles an hour. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again later.